Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes the sources we pull together for these sessions, they look like a single cohesive research paper.
Yeah, very neat and tidy.
Exactly. Other times, like today, the stack on my desk looks more like an entire college curriculum. We're talking technology, economics, sociology, philosophy. We are really taking on a comprehensive synthesis of modern societal complexities.
Well, that's just the nature of 21st century challenges, isn't it? They just don't exist in silos.
Not at all.
So our mission today is to really dive deep into these disparate expert viewpoints. We're talking AI programmers, ethicists, community leaders, economists.
The whole gamut.
The whole gamut.
Yeah.
And the idea is to extract the truly valuable nuggets of insight. For you, the learner, the goal is to leave this conversation with a truly panoramic yet highly detailed understanding of these interconnected forces that are shaping your life in the world right now.
Okay, so let's unpack the sheer breadth of this material for a second. We're discussing everything from the minute details of how data training sets perpetuate bias.
Right, the really granular stuff.
All the way up to these massive philosophical questions like equitable healthcare access, and even the psychological tools like the growth mindset that you need just to cope with the speed of it all.
And that's what we're looking for, right? The golden thread.
Exactly. Why does the moral dilemma of globalization connect directly to the challenge of digital isolation? We need to find the underlying principles that are linking all these massive, evolving challenges.
And there's an urgency embedded in all these sources. That's a common theme. It feels like the rate of change has it's outstripped our existing societal frameworks.
We're constantly playing catch up.
Constantly, whether that's regulatory bodies trying to govern AI or educational systems trying to prepare students for jobs that frankly don't even exist yet.
Right.
So the insights we're going to uncover today aren't just, academic observations. They are vital pieces of knowledge that allow you to anticipate future shifts and to critically evaluate the world around you.
So if the common factor is unprecedented speed, let's start where that speed is most palpable.
Technology.
Absolutely. We're starting at the intersection of technological possibility and, human morality. The sources present artificial intelligence as a double-edged sword, but I want to push past that simple metaphor. What does the cutting edge actually look like, and what are the specific dangers these sources are warning us about right now?
Well, when experts call it a double-edged sword, they're referring to the scale of its power. I mean, we are building systems that can make life-altering decisions.
Life-altering is the right word? From who gets interviewed for a job?
To who receives a specific medical treatment. And the sources are extremely clear on the immediate imperative here. We must create responsible, unbiased machines, and we have to do it right now. The window for establishing robust, ethical, and regulatory frameworks is extremely short.
So why the rush? I mean, we've always regulated technology eventually. Yeah. Cars, planes.
Because the technology is evolving at what the sources call a breakneck pace. It's faster than any prior technology we've had to incorporate socially. Every single month brings a new capability, often one that was completely unanticipated.
And the risk? It's not some far-off sci-fi scenario.
No, the risk, as it's articulated in these papers, is stark. It's that if we fail to implement transparent, human-aligned guardrails, we risk creating autonomous systems that, by just optimizing for a goal we set.
A goal that might seem harmless.
Exactly. A harmless goal. But in achieving it, they become detrimental to humanity in ways we just didn't foresee. It's the difference between building a fast car and building a fast car without any brakes.
And the most immediate practical danger isn't necessarily, a rogue AI. It's this incredibly subtle and insidious quagmire of algorithmic bias. The sources spend a significant amount of time detailing how prejudice gets inadvertently programmed right into the code.
This is perhaps the most critical concern for fairness and equity today. Think about it. If an AI system is trained on historical data sets, say 50 years of data reflecting biased policing decisions.
Or biased lending practices or hiring patterns.
Precisely. The AI doesn't see the bias, it just sees a correlation. It learns the pattern and then it automates it. And in doing so, it often makes that prejudice invisible and massively scalable.
So we are essentially digitizing and accelerating our own worst historical prejudices.
That's a perfect way to put it. And the sources cite numerous examples, particularly concerning data protection and transparency.
What's a really concrete one?
There's one analysis they highlight where AI systems used for evaluating mortgage loan applications were found to deny a statistically higher percentage of applications from certain minority groups.
Compared to equally qualified applicants from majority groups.
Exactly. And the AI didn't intend to be biased, but its training data, which just reflected past human-driven systemic bias, caused it to scale that injustice from, lines of code into a real-world consequence.
That makes transparency an absolute non-negotiable requirement. You have to be able to see inside the machine.
It is a crucial counterbalance. If an AI system acts as a black box, and we can't audit and understand why it reached a decision, why was this person denied the loan, why was this medical diagnosis reached, we lose all accountability.
So transparency means being able to trace the logic.
All the way back to the data inputs and the algorithm structure. Without stringent data protection standards and mandated transparency, the potential for this kind of systemic hidden bias remains massive, and it's quietly eroding democratic fairness.
But, and this is always the but, with powerful technologies, we can't let this necessary ethical apprehension lead to total paralysis. There's a need to balance this with the significant utilitarian potential of AI.
We absolutely must. I mean, it would be unethical not to pursue some of these applications.
Yeah.
The sources give really concrete, compelling examples. Take medical diagnostics. An AI system trained on millions of mammograms or retina scans can spot anomalies with greater speed and consistency than even the best trained human eye.
Which means earlier detection of cancer or eye disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That benefit is transformative, especially in areas that have limited access to specialist human doctors. It means AI can actually democratize medical expertise.
And it's not just medicine.
No. Think about climate modeling. AI can analyze these vast, incredibly complex data sets, atmospheric conditions, ocean currents, historical trends, to predict environmental shifts with far greater accuracy.
So it helps governments and organizations anticipate and mitigate catastrophic events, planning for a drought or strengthening coastal defenses.
Right. So the utilitarian argument is that AI, when it's used responsibly, offers us tools to tackle challenges that our own cognitive limits just can't solve quickly enough.
Which brings us squarely into this stifling innovation debate, because there is a powerful counter-argument in the material suggesting that overregulation might actually stifle this potentially life-saving progress.
And that tension is one of the toughest challenges for policymakers. It really is. If we impose static, overly restrictive regulations today based on our current technological limitations, we might inadvertently prevent the development of a breakthrough solution tomorrow.
Because the technology is moving so fast.
So fast that today's restriction could become tomorrow's massive missed opportunity.
So the goal isn't to slow the technology down, but to make sure it's building an ethical roadmap while it accelerates. How do the sources suggest we thread that needle?
By focusing on principle-based governance rather than, rigid, specific rules, regulation has to be nimble. It has to benefit the collective society at large without halting progress.
So you focus on principles like accountability, transparency, fairness.
Exactly. Those are the core principles. And you allow developers the flexibility to innovate within those ethical boundaries. It's incredibly challenging, of course, because the regulator is always running to catch up with the innovator.
And the moment we start talking about innovation and autonomous systems, we naturally transition from the moral code of the machine to the massive economic reality it's creating. Automation is causing a fundamental paradigm shift in the workplace. What do the sources say is the central psychological response to this change?
It's a profound, almost existential fear of obsolescence. The central anxiety, particularly among workers whose roles involve repetitive or data-heavy tasks, is that machines will systematically usurp human roles,
leading to a future where large categories of current employment are just unnecessary.
Exactly.
We've seen these historical shifts before, right? The agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution. Technology has always displaced labor. Why does this current automation wave feel different, maybe more threatening?
The speed is different, yes, but it's also the type of displacement. Past revolutions typically replaced manual muscle power.
Right, a machine could lift more than a person.
This current shift, driven by advanced AI, is replacing cognitive labor. The ability to analyze, to categorize, to predict. This affects white-collar jobs, administrative roles, even some highly technical, analytical positions.
So when a machine can draft a legal brief or process a financial claim better, faster, and cheaper than a human, the threat is felt across the socioeconomic spectrum in a way it wasn't before.
In a way it absolutely wasn't before.
But again, there is an optimistic counter-argument presented here, this idea of the redefinition of labor.
And that's where it gets really interesting. The optimistic view doesn't deny the displacement. It just suggests the total amount of labor needed won't actually decrease. It will simply shift.
So automation handles the predictable, repetitive, data-heavy stuff,
thereby pushing the workforce towards roles that require what the sources call more creative and interpersonal roles. Basically, tasks that AI cannot easily replicate.
So we're talking about complex emotional intelligence, unique creative ideation, high-level strategy,
Customized client care.
jobs that require deep human connection, judgment, ethical nuance.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these uniquely human skills become the premium commodity. A machine can analyze millions of data points, but it can't lead a team through a crisis with empathy. It can't conceptualize a truly novel work of art. It struggles with multi-layered, ambiguous negotiation. This shift really highlights the inherent value of human connection and judgment.
That sounds like a wonderful future, but the sources immediately slap a large disclaimer on that optimism. They state this shift presupposes a successful transition in education. This is the critical, non-optional prerequisite.
It is the absolute hinge upon which the future of work turns. If we continue to educate our population using systems designed for the industrial age, systems focused on memorization and standardized, predictable output, we are literally preparing them for automated obsolescence.
We're training them for the jobs the machines will do best.
A successful transition means fundamentally overhauling how we prepare people, moving away from teaching specific, perishable tasks to teaching enduring, portable competencies.
And what's the societal risk if we fail to address this educational transition effectively?
The sources warn that failure risks exacerbating the societal divide in a dramatic way.
How so?
Well, if the new, high-value creative roles are only accessible to those who already have access to specialized, expensive training, or if the only people who can pivot successfully are those with high initial capital, the gap between the high-skilled, adapting class and the low-skilled, displaced class grows into an unbridgeable chasm.
And that's not just an economic issue, it's a direct threat to social stability.
Absolutely.
So the solution is laid out pretty clearly. Priority must be given to reskilling and upskilling the existing workforce, and that requires fostering these core competencies like adaptability, critical thinking, and advanced problem-solving skills.
That's the strategic move. We have to start viewing adaptability as the core currency of the future workforce. We cannot train someone today for a specific AI-enhanced role that's going to be invented 5 years from now.
We don't even know what it's called yet.
We don't. But we can train them to learn that role quickly when it appears. And that means investing in adult education, in vocational training, with a focus on these meta skills, and ensuring educational resources are accessible to every demographic so no one is left behind in this shift.
It's like an investment in the human operating system, making sure it can handle the next required update. And this focus on critical thinking and adaptability brings us directly to the technologies that shape our social lives, which are just as disruptive as those shaping our professional lives.
If not more so.
We've established that technology dictates the economy, but it also fundamentally dictates how we engage socially. So let's talk about social media. It's ubiquitous, and the sources highlight a profound contradiction at its core, what they call the paradox of connection.
It's really the defining paradox of the digital age. I mean, social media undeniably democratizes connection.
Yeah.
It allows marginalized voices to unite. It facilitates global movements. It lets families stay close across borders. But there is a palpable consensus, as they put it, that this same technology simultaneously creates profound isolation. And it does that by fostering a relentless culture of comparison.
I think we all recognize that feeling. We're connected to thousands of people, yet we can feel intensely alone. How do the sources detail the mechanism of this isolation? It's got to be more than just scrolling, right?
Oh, it stems directly from the platform design itself. Social media is optimized for engagement.
Yeah.
And nothing generates engagement like an emotional response, particularly envy and inadequacy.
So we are just constantly bombarded with these curated, unrealistic portrayals of life.
Constantly. It's everyone's highlights reel. Their greatest career success, their perfect vacation, their idealized family, all of it filtered, edited, and presented as if it were an effortless reality.
And when you, the viewer, compare your messy, complicated, three-dimensional everyday life to someone else's polished two-dimensional facade, the mental health toll becomes acute.
Absolutely. The sources note that this constant, subtle barrage of unrealistic comparison is just wreaking havoc on mental health, particularly among young people who are still in that critical phase of establishing self-worth and identity.
It must fuel anxiety.
It fuels anxiety, it deepens feelings of inadequacy, and it drives this never-ending cycle of seeking external validation through likes and comments. It fundamentally shifts our internal focus from, say, self-improvement to public performance.
This sounds almost entirely negative, yet the sources are careful to recognize its powerful capacity for good.
Because it is a powerful tool. Its positive potential lies specifically in community building and fostering niche interests.
Right.
If you have a highly specialized non-traditional hobby, or if you belong to a demographic that lacks representation in traditional physical communities, social media can provide the only global space where you feel truly seen and understood.
So it offers a crucial sense of belonging that can combat the very isolation it otherwise creates.
Exactly. It's a paradox.
So, if the technology is neither inherently good nor evil, but really just a tool that amplifies existing human tendencies, what is the crucial intervention? What's the solution?
The sources overwhelmingly point to one thing: digital literacy. The key is educating users, and not just children but adults as well, to distinguish sharply between the facade and reality.
And this isn't just about spotting a Photoshop filter.
No. It's about understanding the fundamental business model.
That's a key distinction. So digital literacy isn't just technical, it's a critical thinking skill that allows you to dissect the economics of attention.
Exactly. It's learning to recognize that the platform isn't offering you connection, it's selling your attention to advertisers.
Yeah.
Every single feature, from the infinite scroll to the like button, is designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities to maximize the time you spend consuming.
So by training people to understand the manipulative elements and the artificial nature of the feed, we can empower them to mitigate the negative mental health impacts.
And to use the tool intentionally for positive ends, rather than being used by the tool.
If the social media feed is a highly structured, curated algorithm optimized for attention, what is the antidote? The sources jump immediately to a beautiful contrast: the raw, unfiltered expression of art. Art, they argue, serves as a raw reflection of the human condition.
And unlike the algorithm, which tries to predict, satisfy, and control your behavior, art often does the exact opposite. It provokes, it challenges, and it forces introspection. It is indispensable for challenging the status quo.
Artists throughout history have been that critical mirror,
reflecting society's injustices, its hypocrisies, and its triumphs.
And beyond just challenging norms, the sources argue that art fosters social cohesion. How does a piece of music or a painting achieve that unifying effect in our fragmented digital world?
Art creates a shared emotional vocabulary. When a community collectively experiences a powerful film, or witnesses an emotional play, or views a moving sculpture, they share a moment of collective emotion that transcends language and cultural differences. It provides common ground.
A topic for a necessary, maybe difficult dialogue. This brings us to a strong assertion in the material: the idea that art must be egalitarian, not elitist.
That's vital, because if art is only found and protected in museums, accessible only to those with wealth, time, and prior knowledge, it stops being a unifying force. It starts reinforcing social stratification.
So the sources emphasize that whether it's grand sculpture, commercial cinema, or raw street art, the accessibility of genuine expression is what matters.
It has to reflect the diverse voices of the community to serve its societal function. When art is elitist, it speaks only to a few. When it's egalitarian, it becomes this powerful engine for understanding and empathy across demographics. It allows unheard voices to challenge the dominant narrative.
And that's the core power of dialogue. Art possesses the power to ignite dialogue and bridge cultural chasms. It gives us a safe space to discuss unsafe ideas.
A photograph documenting suffering, or a piece of music capturing historical trauma, can communicate a human experience instantly. It often bypasses our intellectual defenses and just reaches us emotionally.
And the moment we achieve that shared emotional language through art, we become better equipped to discuss the systems that affect us all globally, which leads us seamlessly into the next section: the messy reality of globalization.
It's all connected.
We've talked about bridging cultural divides through art and connection. Now let's tackle the broader structural mechanisms of trade, connectivity, and consequence: globalization. The sources are careful to acknowledge the benefits: It has undeniably facilitated trade and cultural exchange, raising overall living standards in many parts of the world.
That's the high-level success story, absolutely.
Yeah.
Globalization means that goods, capital, and information can move across borders with unprecedented ease. This efficiency has driven down consumer prices and spread technological advances very rapidly.
However,
The sources dedicate significant space to the critiques, arguing that the structure of this process has extracted some very severe costs.
and the most immediate critique they highlight is the cultural impact, the idea that globalization often leads to cultural homogenization. What exactly does that erosion of unique identities look like on the ground?
Well, it's the process where unique local traditions are replaced by standardized global imports, often driven by multinational corporate pressures.
So you mean the high street of nearly any major city in the world looking the same?
That's a perfect example. The same fast food chains, the same clothing brands, often speaking a shared global language. And the result is that local artisans struggle, regional dialects decline, traditional cuisine is overshadowed.
Cultural diversity, like biological diversity, is a resilience mechanism.
It is, and when it's swallowed by a dominant global culture, we all become poorer and less adaptable.
So standardization isn't just efficient, it's flattening. But the critique goes deeper than culture. We have to discuss the ethical and environmental costs that are inherent in the global supply chain. The sources highlight environmental degradation and, critically, the exploitation of labor in developing nations.
This is where we hit the concept of economic externalities. That's the key term. It means the hidden costs of production that are externalized or, pushed off onto third parties or the environment, rather than being reflected in the final consumer price.
Okay, explain that mechanism. How does the pressure for cheap goods lead to environmental degradation specifically?
To achieve the cheapest product globally, whether it's electronics, clothing, or manufactured goods, corporations often move production to regions with minimal environmental regulation. This allows for unchecked pollution, excessive resource extraction, and high carbon emissions without consequence.
So the true cost of production, which includes the air pollution, the wasted water, the degradation of the local environment,
is paid by the vulnerable community near the factory, not by the corporation or the end consumer.
And the same logic applies to labor exploitation. If the global market rewards the cheapest labor, businesses have a direct financial incentive to avoid robust labor protections or fair wages in those developing nations.
It creates a race to the bottom. The sources highlight how this dynamic concentrates wealth in developed nations or corporate headquarters, while it concentrates environmental and labor degradation in the global south. This system treats human workers and fragile ecosystems as disposable inputs in the relentless pursuit of profit margins.
Which necessitates the clear, recurring theme in the sources, the urgent mandate for equity. We have to strive for a more equitable form of globalization. This means fundamentally shifting priorities away from that single-minded focus on profit.
The sources stress that this shift requires embedding sustainability and fair wages over profit margins. And this isn't just, idealistic. It requires enforceable international standards for human rights, labor, and environmental protection that apply regardless of a country's internal regulations.
It also involves demanding supply chain transparency.
Absolutely. So consumers and regulators can see exactly how and where products are made, preventing businesses from hiding their externalized costs.
That requires robust international cooperation, but also a willingness from consumers in wealthy nations to accept that cheapness is not the highest value. If we prioritize equitable wages and ecological stability, the true cost of goods will necessarily rise.
It's the moral balancing act of globalization. We have to ensure that trade benefits all participants, stabilizing communities and ecosystems globally, rather than concentrating wealth and exporting degradation. It means embedding ethical standards, like those we discussed for AI transparency, into the global mechanisms of trade.
This focus on sustainability brings us to a dedicated section on environmental awareness. The sources insist that this is no longer an abstract concept, but an urgent mandate. The discussion has fundamentally shifted from a future warning to a present reality.
That's the critical psychological shift. For decades, environmentalism was often framed as protecting the future for our children or grandchildren. Now we are seeing the measurable disruptive degradation in real time.
Extreme weather events, resource scarcity,
Shifting climates impacting agriculture and migration. And the sources argue that we must respond on two fronts simultaneously. They see it as a dual responsibility.
The first front is holding corporations accountable. These are the entities with the largest carbon footprints and the greatest capacity for large-scale systemic change or systemic damage.
Corporate accountability requires more than just voluntary targets. It demands policy carbon pricing, strict emission standards, and regulatory bodies with the power to enforce environmental protections.
It also requires sustained consumer and investor pressure.
Right, pushing businesses to adopt circular economy models where waste is minimized and resources are reused, rather than the linear take, make, dispose models that define so much of current global production.
And the second front of action is the individual level, practicing responsible consumption.
While corporate responsibility is massive, our collective choices aggregate into an enormous impact. Responsible consumption means moving beyond simple recycling. It requires an awareness of the entire life cycle of a product.
Where did it come from? How was it made?
And where will it go when you're done with it? It demands we question the necessity of every purchase and choose durability, ethics, and sustainability over cheap convenience.
So it's not a choice between policy action and individual choice. It requires a synchronized effort where regulation sets the floor, market forces apply pressure, and individual behavior moves the needle towards sustainable outcomes. It's the only way to manage the massive externalities created by globalization.
And if we connect this back to our earlier discussion on digital literacy, we must become equally literate in the environmental footprint of our consumption. That means learning to filter through greenwashing, the marketing facade, and understanding the true ecological and labor cost obscured by these complex global supply chains. That knowledge empowers you to make meaningful choices.
We've navigated these huge global and technological systems. Now let's shift focus to the foundational elements that are necessary for individuals to successfully operate within those complex systems. Let's start with the source of awareness itself, education.
The sources make it very clear that the ability to grasp these global complexities, to understand algorithmic bias, to analyze supply chain ethics, to respond to environmental urgency. It all stems fundamentally from a robust educational foundation. But they argue our current models often fall short.
And the prerequisite, according to the sources, is that education must be holistic, not merely about academic regurgitation. What is the crucial distinction here for the modern learner?
Academic regurgitation prepares students for predictable tests in a predictable world. It rewards memory over original thought.
But the world we've spent the last hour describing, full of technological disruption and systemic crises, is anything but predictable.
Exactly. Holistic education focuses on developing the whole person, their ethical reasoning, emotional intelligence, collaboration skills, and the ability to synthesize information from wildly disparate fields.
So we need to teach people how to think, not just what to think.
Precisely. It's about systems thinking, understanding how AI ethics connect to economic stability, which then connects to environmental policy. It involves developing core competencies like judgment and a moral compass, which are essential for navigating the ethical complexities of the digital age.
The ultimate goal, then, is to cultivate lifelong learners who possess the intellectual curiosity required to adapt to this ever-changing world. This is the antidote to the fear of job obsolescence we discussed back in Part 1.
Intellectual curiosity is the engine of adaptability. It really is. If a new technology arrives and completely restructures your industry, the person who views learning as a lifelong, non-finite process, who is genuinely curious about the new skill required, is the person who pivots and thrives.
They approach the challenge not with fear, but with a desire to understand and master the unknown.
And that's the key. So if we connect this to the necessary reskilling of the workforce, intellectual curiosity is what makes reskilling possible. It transforms change from a threat into an opportunity for growth and mastery.
And that transformation, that ability to see change as opportunity, is the defining trait of resilience in the modern context.
It is. And this requires educational systems to prioritize things like project-based learning, critical analysis of sources, and teaching students how to fail constructively, how to use it as data for improvement.
Intellectual curiosity and adaptation thrive best when they're supported by a strong social structure. The sources describe community as the bedrock of a functioning society. And in our increasingly fragmented world where connection is often digital and isolating, this bedrock has never been more vital.
A strong physical and social community provides a powerful sense of belonging, and that acts as a vital buffer against the emotional fragmentation caused by social media and economic uncertainty. It grounds individuals, it provides support networks, shared purpose, and real-world accountability.
But community isn't just about belonging passively. The sources specify that for a community to thrive, its members must practice empathy and compassion not just as feelings, but as verbs. This implies active, measurable effort.
That concept, empathy as a verb, is incredibly powerful because it demands action. It means moving beyond simply feeling sorry for a neighbor who is struggling with job displacement or an illness.
And actively engaging with solutions.
Yes, it means mentorship, volunteering at the local level, participating in neighborhood watch systems, or actively engaging in local governance.
So it's concrete civic engagement. It's what transforms a collection of isolated individuals into a functional, supportive society.
Exactly. The defining feature of a civilized society, according to these experts, is taking active steps to support the vulnerable. This action ensures that no demographic is left behind by the rapid shifts in AI or globalization. A community that practices empathy as a verb is one that invests in its shared education system, that advocates for local health accessibility, and that ensures its most vulnerable citizens are seen and supported. It is the real-world antidote to digital isolation.
Speaking of supporting the vulnerable, let's turn to health. The advancements in medical technology are truly, they're miraculous. The ability to diagnose early, treat previously incurable diseases, and personalize medicine through genomics is just a staggering achievement of human ingenuity.
It is a profound demonstration of what focused human knowledge can achieve. We are solving complex genetic puzzles, extending lifespans, and dramatically improving the quality of life for millions. However, this progress immediately sharpens a fundamental moral dilemma.
The glaring disparity in healthcare access.
That's it.
And here is where technology, which many people assume should be a great equalizer, often functions as an unequalizer. While telemedicine should allow remote diagnosis and monitoring in underserved areas, the sources argue that high-level medical technology often remains the privilege of the wealthy.
That disparity is a matter of economic structure. Revolutionary treatments, personalized gene therapies, cutting-edge diagnostic equipment, proprietary surgical robotics are often prohibitively expensive.
Because of the massive R&D costs to produce them.
Exactly. And if these breakthroughs are only accessible to those with significant wealth or exceptional insurance, they only serve to widen the health gap. The ability to live a healthy, long life should not be dependent on one's economic status.
It creates a global moral crisis. We have the capability to cure, but we lack the collective will or the structure to distribute that cure equitably. What is the necessary ethical response outlined in the source material?
The necessity to champion healthcare as a fundamental human right. This means prioritizing access and affordability right alongside innovation. It calls for structural changes, whether that involves global efforts to license life-saving drugs affordably in developing nations, or national policy changes to subsidize essential medical technologies to ensure universal availability.
And this isn't just about basic care either. It's about ensuring that the benefits of the most advanced, most miraculous technologies are distributed equitably across society.
It is the ultimate test of our collective humanity. If we spend decades developing complex, personalized medicine, but only a fraction of the global population can afford it, we've prioritized scientific achievement, the knowledge acquisition over societal fairness, the application of that knowledge for the collective good. Ensuring equitable access to health is fundamentally an act of defining what kind of civilized society we aim to be in the face of incredible technological power.
We've discussed the massive systems, AI, globalization, education, and healthcare, and all the external pressures they create. As we wrap up, we need to focus inward on the individual psychological tools required to successfully navigate a world defined by this constant change and complexity.
Navigating career uncertainty, health challenges, social fragmentation, and constant information overload requires more than just technical skill. It requires an internal compass. And the sources point directly to one psychological tool as being essential: the growth mindset.
Let's define this concept precisely, because it is so fundamental to the ability to adapt. The growth mindset is the belief that our core abilities, our intelligence, our talents are not fixed, but malleable.
Which stands in direct contrast to the fixed mindset, which assumes your abilities are static. If you have a fixed mindset, when you encounter a significant challenge, like the automation of your industry or a failure in a major project, you see that challenge as a ceiling. You retreat because you believe you lack the innate talent to succeed.
Conversely, if you operate with a growth mindset, you embrace that challenge. And this fundamentally changes how you perceive the most difficult experience of all: failure. Failure is no longer a personal dead end or a verdict on your worth.
It's seen instead as data for improvement.
It's feedback, not fate.
That reframing is essential for adaptability in this volatile workplace. If you lose your job to automation, seeing that transition as data information on where you need to upskill or pivot or seek new knowledge is the core mechanism for recovery and future success. Your brain, in this framework, is not a hard drive with a fixed capacity, but a muscle that grows the more you use it, particularly when you're struggling.
That psychological resilience is key to navigating challenges across all the complex spheres we discussed: health, career, and society. The sources also mention specific applications for nurturing resilience beyond just self-talk.
Resilience is built through social and intellectual structure. Socially, this means nurturing lifelong friendships and strong community ties, which provide essential emotional stability and support when the external environment is uncertain. You are not meant to navigate these massive challenges alone.
And intellectually, resilience requires engaging in critical thinking to filter through misinformation. This connects directly back to the need for digital literacy and holistic education we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. Resilience is not just emotional toughness, it's intellectual rigor. In the age of algorithmic feeds and pervasive facades, the ability to discern truth from noise, to question the source, and to rigorously test assumptions is a core competency of a resilient mind. Misinformation creates unnecessary anxiety and it destabilizes your judgment. A resilient person uses critical thinking to maintain a clear picture of reality, even when that reality is uncomfortable.
What's fascinating is the synthesis here. Holistic education builds critical thinking. Critical thinking strengthens resilience, and resilience is the output of the growth mindset. Ultimately, the sources provide one crucial guiding insight:
that our mindset ultimately dictates our trajectory. Your internal belief system determines how you respond to the immense external pressures of the modern world. You can choose to be defined by the challenges: algorithmic bias, job obsolescence, isolation, or you can use a malleable, curious mindset to adapt, learn, and dictate your own path forward, contributing actively to a more equitable world.
We have certainly covered a vast terrain today, a true map of modern complexity. We started with the ethical quagmire of AI and the mechanisms of algorithmic bias. We detailed the paradox of digital connection and the essential unifying role of art.
Examine the devastating trade-offs of globalization and the urgent mandate of environmental awareness.
And finished by championing health equity and the power of a growth mindset as a necessary psychological tool.
The terrain is complex, but the insights are clear. And the golden thread connecting all these topics is our collective humanity. Every single system we design, whether it's an AI algorithm, a global supply chain, or a healthcare plan, is fundamentally a reflection of how we choose to treat other people.
Every challenge requires us to cultivate intellectual curiosity,
to understand systems and to practice empathy as a verb, ensuring that our advancements serve the collective good.
So, as you move forward in your own journey of knowledge acquisition, remember this: the complexity of the world demands not simple answers, but intellectual rigor. Stay critical, stay curious, and always question the facade, whether it's a social media profile or a corporate claim. That is the necessary mindset for navigating and shaping the complexities of the 21st century.
And here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you conclude this deep dive. Consider how our collective success in defining equitable globalization, a system prioritizing fair wages and sustainability, is inherently dependent on prioritizing holistic education and the widespread adoption of a growth mindset across global leadership structures. If leaders responsible for designing global policy believe their own abilities or the systems they oversee are fixed and incapable of fundamental change, how can they possibly adapt and evolve to create the more equitable, functional world that our source material insists is necessary? The mindset of the decision maker determines the trajectory of the system.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed. We dive into some really complex source material.
And we come out the other side with the insights that actually matter.
Exactly. And today, the sources we've got tackle, well, probably the biggest challenge of the modern age: just navigating a world that's defined by this exponential change.
That's right. And the sources we've pulled together, they aren't just a list of problems. It's more like a comprehensive dissection of the critical issues that are really defining our times.
Okay, so what are we covering?
We're looking at the big external forces first, the cultural currents, the ethical dilemmas in technology, and then we're going to pivot to the internal toolkit.
The skills you actually need.
The skills you need for personal resilience, for community strength, for Well, for thriving, really.
Yeah. So we're definitely moving beyond the headlines and all the noise. Our promise to you is that we're going to distill the core insights from all these different topics and help you connect the dots between, say, a massive external challenge like healthcare equity
Or climate change.
and your own internal development goals. We want to give you the vocabulary, the analytical framework to understand and, maybe more importantly, to engage with the world around you.
Okay, so where do we start?
Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Starting with those huge, overwhelming forces that, that really shape our collective consciousness. The first thing that really jumped out at me, and I found it genuinely surprising, was where the sources put popular culture. They have it on the same critical level as, like, advanced medical technology. We tend to just dismiss film, fashion, music.
Yeah.
It's just entertainment, right?
Yeah.
But the research makes it so clear. They describe pop culture as incredibly potent. So why? Why this intense focus on its power?
Well, the sources define that potency by its ability to create and sort of disseminate a shared reality.
A shared reality, okay.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Unlike traditional institutions, pop culture doesn't lecture you. It doesn't give you a rule book. It models behavior. It models aspiration, what's normal, and it does it at a massive scale.
So it's setting the baseline without us even noticing.
Exactly. What dictates what we perceive as a successful life, or even what counts as political or social dissent.
Yeah.
So often that's being dictated by the narratives we just consume passively.
So if pop culture is, as you said, the water we swim in, it sets all the unstated norms, then the big danger the sources are highlighting here is the risk of becoming passive consumers. If we're not actively thinking about what's in that water, we just end up internalizing all these norms without a single question.
That's it, precisely. And this is where the sources bring in this necessity of critical engagement. It's about consciously, actively curating what you absorb.
So it's a choice.
It has to be a choice.
Yeah.
Because the danger is that cultural consumption stops being a conscious choice, and it just becomes this automated acceptance of whatever's put in front of you.
And that leads directly to what the sources called the algorithm caveat, which feels so relevant right now.
Oh, absolutely.
We're basically outsourcing our critical judgment to machines. And these machines are designed for what? Retention and revenue, not for our intellectual or emotional growth.
Not at all. The algorithm is designed to do one thing really, really well. Feed you more of what you already like. Or at least what keeps you scrolling.
Right.
It maximizes familiarity. It maximizes emotional response. It does not maximize intellectual challenge. So it locks you into what we now call a cultural filter bubble.
And if you start defining your entire worldview based on what that algorithm is feeding you, you miss everything else.
You miss all the complexity, all the nuance. You miss the conflicting but still valid viewpoints that exist outside of that bubble.
I think we can all probably think of an algorithm recommendation we accepted that, looking back, it really shaped our view on something in a way we didn't consciously sign up for.
It's that subtle, that insidious reinforcement. And this passive consumption, this is where it gets serious, because it can lead to the acceptance, the internalization of genuinely harmful narratives without you even realizing it's happening.
And what do they mean by a harmful narrative in this context?
Well, that's the real threat. When a harmful narrative, let's say it's one that normalizes extreme consumerism, or maybe unrealistic body standards, or even, polarizing political rhetoric, when that's packaged in a really catchy song or a viral TV show, it sort of bypasses our critical thinking.
It goes straight for the emotions.
It's absorbed emotionally before it can ever be vetted intellectually. So the sources suggest that active curation, that conscious selection process, it's less of a hobby and it's more like a required defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism against manipulated consent.
That's a great way to put it.
It's really about being the editor of your own mind, isn't it? Because if you can't curate the stories you're telling yourself about the world, how can you possibly maintain the clarity you need to tackle these other massive systemic challenges?
You can't. That intellectual sovereignty, it's foundational.
And that's a perfect transition to our next topic, which is all about immense power and some very real ethical tensions in modern medical technology. So shifting gears pretty dramatically here, our sources absolutely acknowledge the miracle of what they call revolutionary advancements in medical tech.
True.
We're talking about treatments that were just pure science fiction a decade ago. Targeted gene therapies, AI-driven diagnostics, personalized medicine that can literally eradicate diseases that used to be a death sentence. It's just a staggering display of our technological capability.
It is genuinely revolutionary. I mean, we've moved beyond just treating symptoms to, in some cases, actually correcting the underlying genetic code that's causing the problem in the first place. But
There's always but.
there's always a but. This miracle brings a shadow with it, and as the core ethical caveat, which is the problem of equity.
Equity is always the choke point, isn't it?
It so often is.
The sources point out that if these cutting-edge treatments, the ones that offer a genuine paradigm shift in how we think about health, if they are prohibitively expensive, then they only serve a tiny fraction of the population.
They become an elite solution to what is a universal human problem: suffering.
So can you give us an example?
Sure. Consider a new gene therapy that can cure a rare form of cancer, but it costs, say, $2 million per patient because of the immense R&D costs that went into it.
Okay.
The technological capability is there, the cure exists, but fair access does not. And that creates what the sources call the tension point. It's this stark, deeply uncomfortable contrast between what we can do technologically.
And who actually gets to benefit from it?
Exactly. It's a profound societal dilemma when your health outcome is determined more by your wealth than by your need.
So what's the answer? The sources must address this, right? I mean, if R&D costs billions of dollars, how do you democratize access without bankrupting the very institutions that are creating these innovations? Is there a middle ground proposed here?
Well, the sources don't offer a simple financial model, as there probably isn't one, but they do firmly establish the philosophical ground. The conclusion they come to reinforces this ethical imperative. Healthcare must remain a right, not a luxury privilege.
A right, not a privilege.
And to move toward that, the sources suggest that innovation itself needs to be structured with democratization in mind from the very beginning.
So that implies that policy and ethical oversight, they need to be integrated way back in the research phase, not just bolted on at the end when the product is ready to sell.
Precisely. It's about shifting the focus of innovation itself. How do we innovate not just for efficacy, but also for affordability?
How do we do that?
Well, the discussion points toward exploring things like differential pricing models, where costs are adjusted based on a country's economic status, or challenging certain patent protections when public health is genuinely at stake.
And what about government's role?
A huge part of it is restructuring government funding to specifically incentivize research into universally scalable, low-cost delivery methods. The idea is that when a breakthrough cure exists, society has a moral obligation to prevent it from becoming just another tool for social stratification.
Tis if we don't.
If we don't, and large segments of society are denied preventative care or these breakthrough cures simply because of cost, the entire system suffers. You get greater social instability, reduced overall productivity. The goal can't just be creating solutions, it has to be creating universal solutions.
It's a really powerful argument that the failure to democratize medical success fundamentally undermines the whole social contract.
It does.
And that actually brings us perfectly to the next section.
Right.
What are the necessary building blocks for a society that can actually handle these kinds of complex pressures? All right, so moving from these huge external pressures to the foundations of an adaptable future, we land on education. And wow, the sources were extremely critical of the status quo here.
They did not hold back.
No. They state that the old model of rote memorization is described not just as obsolete, but as absolutely archaic. Why such strong language?
Because the core premise of that entire model, the idea that information scarcity makes memorization valuable, is completely gone. It's vanished.
Right. Information is everywhere now.
In an era where any child with a phone can look up the complete history of the Roman Empire, access thousands of scientific papers in less than 3 seconds, the ability to just recall facts is, frankly, redundant.
So the sources are arguing we're basically training children for an economy that doesn't exist anymore.
For a past economy, yes.
So if we're moving away from that sort of industrial age model, what does the future workforce actually require?
Well, the sources define the core needs as critical thinkers and problem solvers. These are the skills that, current machine learning models really struggle to replicate.
The human touch.
The human touch.
Yeah.
The ability to synthesize information, to apply knowledge creatively, and especially to navigate ambiguity. That's the key.
So this requires a big shift toward what they call holistic development.
A huge shift. Education needs to develop the whole person. And what that means is integrating emotional intelligence, the ability to understand and manage yourself and your relationships right alongside the traditional academic subjects.
So it's not just about what you know.
No, it's about producing ethical citizens and effective collaborators, not just, human data storage devices.
That makes a lot of sense. Collaboration, communication, ethical reasoning. Those are skills you can't just download. But how does this holistic approach specifically help with the volatility of the modern job market?
It helps by focusing on the truly required skills, which the sources identify as creativity and adaptability.
Okay.
We're living in an economy where the half-life of any given technical skill is just shortening dramatically. Think about it. A specific coding language you learn today, or certain paralegal tasks, they can be automated in a matter of years.
So if your entire value is based on one of those finite, specialized skills, you're incredibly vulnerable.
Highly vulnerable. Adaptability, then, becomes the ultimate professional insurance policy.
That's a great way of putting it.
It is. Adaptability is what allows you to pivot when your current skill set becomes obsolete. If you're adaptable, you can manage 3, 4, maybe even 5 major career shifts in your lifetime.
And creativity, where does that fit in?
Creativity is what you use to invent new ways of applying existing knowledge to completely novel problems. The sources really highlight that the next generation has to be able to navigate a workforce that's described as being constantly in flux.
So a rote learning education gives you a skill set that doesn't transfer.
Exactly. Whereas an education focused on holistic development gives you a perpetual learning engine. It teaches you how to learn for life.
That focus on adaptability and survival skills leads us directly to the planet's survival strategy, environmental action and responsible consumption. And the sources signal a really serious shift in tone here. They state pretty bluntly that we are past the point of mere observation. We need action. The existential stakes are just. They're no longer up for debate.
No, the debate is over. And the sources delineate a path forward that requires what they call a dual responsibility.
Dual responsibility, meaning two parts.
Two parts. It recognizes that the scale of the challenge, climate change, resource depletion, it's just too big for any single-pronged solution. We need both. We need individual changes in our lifestyle.
Okay, the personal stuff.
Coupled with sustained, powerful, systemic pressure on corporations and on governments.
It's the difference between asking everyone to recycle their own bottles and forcing manufacturers to make products that are actually recyclable in the first place.
That's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So let's deep dive into what that means for the individual, focusing on responsible consumption. How do we move beyond just feeling guilty about our choices?
Yeah.
The individual path involves fundamentally changing our entire relationship with ownership. The sources instruct us to really scrutinize our purchasing habits. It means asking a whole complex series of questions before any money changes hands. Like, what are the materials used to make this? Where did they come from? Were they ethically sourced? Who made this?
And the specific behaviors they detail are buying less and buying better, which that's a direct counter-narrative to the whole consumer culture we were just talking about.
It absolutely is. Buying less directly targets that culture of disposability, of impulse buys. And buying better means prioritizing quality, longevity, repairability.
But the critical action here, the sources say, is understanding the supply chain.
Yes, this is the big one. This is what moves consumption from being a passive sort of recreational activity into a genuine ethical decision-making process.
Understanding the supply chain is tough, though. I mean, most of them are opaque by design. What specific information should you, the learner, be looking for when you try to scrutinize?
The sources suggest focusing on 2 main areas. First, transparency around labor practices. So where was this shirt stitched, and was the person who stitched it fairly compensated?
Okay, that's one.
And second, is the product's projected end-of-life impact. Does the company offer a take-back program? Is this product designed so it can be disassembled for recycling, or is it just destined for a landfill from day one? This deeper level of scrutiny is what transforms consumption into real political and environmental action.
And when you pull back and look at the macro picture, the expert source contextualizes sustainability not as some minor ethical issue, but as a literal survival strategy.
Yeah.
That implies our current economic structure is actively working against our long-term existence.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If our current system is predicated on this linear model, take resources from the earth, make products, dispose of the waste, it is fundamentally incompatible with a finite planet. It just can't work forever.
Which is why the sources introduce this really strong metaphor about the need for a circular economy. Can you unpack that metaphor? What does it tell us about our current situation?
The metaphor states that if we do not adopt a more circular economy, we are borrowing from a future we cannot repay.
Wow.
It's a powerful indictment of that linear model. It positions our current consumption as basically declaring financial bankruptcy on behalf of the next generation.
Right.
A circular economy, on the other hand, it attempts to balance the books.
Can you give us a practical example of what that circular model looks like, beyond just, our municipal recycling bins?
Absolutely. Think about cradle-to-cradle design. Instead of making, say, a carpet that eventually gets torn out and thrown in a landfill, that's the linear model.
Right.
A company designs a carpet where the raw materials, the polymers, are technically still owned by the manufacturer. They lease the carpet to you, the consumer.
Interesting.
And when you're done with it, the manufacturer takes the carpet back, breaks it down into its base components, and uses those same polymers to create a brand new carpet.
So it's a closed loop system.
A completely closed loop system. It eliminates waste, and it maintains the value of those resources indefinitely. It transforms our debt into an ongoing regenerative investment. It shifts our whole focus from consumption to smart resource utilization.
That profound shift in how we manage our planetary resources. It brings us pretty logically to how we manage our people, the social fabric that holds us all together. And here, the sources introduce community and diversity, and they state that these are inextricable concepts. They can't be separated.
And that's a really crucial point to grasp. The function of a community at its deepest, most fundamental level is to provide a sense of belonging and safety.
Okay.
This sense of shared space, of mutual support.
Yeah.
It's the essential antidote to the really profound modern challenge of isolation that we're seeing all over the globe. But that safety net only works if it's wide enough to catch everyone.
So the condition for that community to actually thrive is that it must be inclusive. Inclusivity isn't just a, nice ideal. It's a structural necessity for resilience.
Yes.
If you exclude or you marginalize specific voices or perspectives, you are inherently weakening the collective ability of that entire group to handle stress and to solve complex problems.
Just think about it in terms of problem solving. A homogeneous group will almost always generate homogeneous solutions.
Right. They'll have the same blind spot.
They'll run into the same cognitive blind spots again and again and again. So the core benefit of diversity, and that can be cultural, racial, ideological diversity, is that celebrating it actively serves to challenge our biases and to enrich our collective perspective.
Which just makes the community stronger. It's almost like building redundancies into the system.
That's a great way to think about it.
Diversity forces us to check our assumptions because we're suddenly exposed to multiple lived experiences, different mental models for solving the exact same problem.
Precisely. Bias is really just a cognitive shortcut the brain takes when it's working with limited information. A diverse, inclusive community provides that necessary counter-evidence. It broadens our capacity for understanding and ultimately for innovation. And it builds trust, which is the baseline requirement for any complex society to function efficiently.
So, if diversity is the structural input, what's the practical glue that keeps all these varied, sometimes conflicting perspectives working together effectively? What stops necessary friction from becoming destructive conflict?
That glue, as the sources define it, is the power of empathy and compassion.
Okay.
These are the interpersonal skills that allow difference to exist while still maintaining that shared sense of belonging and safety.
This is where we really need to nail down the crucial distinction that the sources laid out for us, because empathy and compassion, they're often used interchangeably, but the research defines them very separately. Can you clarify that functional difference?
Absolutely. The distinction is really about the step from internal understanding to external action.
Oh, okay.
So empathy is the ability to understand and to share another person's feelings. It's a cognitive and emotional resonance. You feel with them.
Yep.
You recognize their suffering.
And compassion, what's the next step?
Compassion is defined as the action taken to alleviate their suffering. It is the practical, tangible response to that feeling of empathy. The sources call it benevolence in action. It's basically the operationalization of empathy.
That is a critical difference, because you can feel empathy for someone facing, say, economic hardship. You understand their pain, but you can still remain totally passive.
You can, yeah.
Compassion is the moral engine that converts that understanding into tangible support, whether that's, volunteering, donating, advocating for policy change. It requires you to get engaged.
Think of it this way. Imagine there's a sudden crisis, like a localized flood or an economic recession that impacts a neighboring town.
Okay.
Empathy makes you feel bad when you read the news report about it. Compassion makes you organize a community drive to send supplies, or makes you lobby your local representative for aid packages.
One is feeling, the other is doing.
Exactly. And this action, even on a very small scale, is what creates the mechanism for systemic change, what the sources describe as the ripple effect.
The ripple effect.
Yes. Small, consistent acts of kindness, of compassion, they ripple outwards. They build social capital. They create a more humane and resilient society. When individuals consistently act with that benevolence, the social fabric itself strengthens. It increases trust, and it makes the entire system resilient enough to handle deep ideological differences without fracturing. It defines the character of the community at large by making mutual support the expectation, not the exception.
So we've covered the external pressures, culture, technology, and then the structural necessities like education and community. Now we get to the most intimate section of all, the internal toolkit you need to navigate everything else. This is really about building the individual strength to thrive amidst all this constant change. And the toolkit starts with our intellectual defense mechanisms. Creativity and critical thinking. The sources note that creativity isn't just, artistic expression. It's a necessary tool for innovation and for mental well-being.
And when we talk about innovation in this context, we're talking about the ability to solve problems in ways that existing knowledge bases just didn't predict. We needed that creativity for the circular economy solutions we talked about. We absolutely needed to figure out how to democratize healthcare.
And for mental well-being.
Well, creativity is how we synthesize the chaos of modern life and find meaning in it. It's a really powerful buffer against existential stress.
Okay, so if creativity is the necessary tool for innovation, then critical thinking is described as our primary defense mechanism against the digital age's biggest threat, misinformation.
It is the essential filter. We live in an environment that is just saturated with conflicting information, with deepfakes, with hyper-optimized political narratives designed to provoke a reaction. Critical thinking provides the necessary structure for real intellectual engagement. It lets us maintain our intellectual sovereignty.
So what does that structure look like in practice? The sources break down the essential steps.
Well, critical thinking requires the discipline to execute 3 steps, really. First, you have to evaluate evidence.
Is this claim actually backed by credible data?
Right. Second, you have to question sources. What are the potential biases here? What is the source's motivation for telling me this?
And third?
And third, you have to form independent conclusions. It's not just about repeating the loudest voice you heard, but about synthesizing all the available evidence and drawing your own nuanced conclusion from it.
That ability to form independent conclusions feels like an almost radical act in a culture that's so designed for conformity and quick consumption.
It is.
Without that discipline, the sources say the individual is fundamentally vulnerable to manipulation.
And that vulnerability is profound. If you cannot stop, evaluate, and question, you are essentially just a vessel for whatever narrative is best optimized by an algorithm or is the most emotionally compelling.
It's the difference between being told what to think and learning how to think.
Exactly. It equips us with the discernment we need to be responsible citizens, capable of supporting systemic change based on a real factual understanding of the world.
So finally, we turn to the most intimate components of this toolkit. The personal foundation built on mental health and mindset. The sources stress the urgent need to destigmatize mental health, insisting it requires the same attention as physical health.
And this is a societal imperative. It has to be. We readily accept that if you have a broken leg, it requires rehabilitation and professional care.
Of course.
Yet we often treat a mental or an emotional struggle as some kind of personal failing that should be hidden or just powered through. The sources argue that our societal infrastructure has to change to ensure that mental health is prioritized. It's fundamental to our capacity for critical thinking, for adaptability, for compassion. If the mind is struggling, the entire toolkit is compromised.
And part of maintaining that mental health, they say, relies on building a robust external infrastructure.
Yeah.
Your support network.
Yeah.
Specifically, the sources highlight the crucial role of lifelong friendships, but with a very specific requirement. They have to be friends who both challenge us and support us.
That balance is completely non-negotiable for growth. Support provides that psychological safety net. It ensures you feel seen and valued, which is crucial for building resilience when you fail.
But the challenge part.
But the challenge provides the accountability. It provides the necessary push toward evolution. A friend who only ever affirms your current position, even when it's clearly flawed, is comforting, sure, but they ultimately hinder your development.
Right.
A friend who challenges you constructively, who calls you out, they help you pivot, learn, and grow stronger.
This type of nuanced reciprocal support is so fundamental to mental resilience. It gives us a safe place to practice the adaptability that we need out in the workforce.
It does.
Yeah.
And underpinning all this personal development, the willingness to be challenged, to pivot, to evolve, is what the sources call the growth mindset. This is presented as the overarching concept that makes all the other internal work even possible.
And what is the core belief of the growth mindset?
The core belief is, it's elegantly simple, that our abilities are not fixed. You are not stuck with the intellectual or emotional capacity you have today. And this one idea fundamentally transforms the relationship we have with struggle and, crucially, with failure.
It transforms struggle into just part of the process.
Right.
The growth mindset defines the process as this continuous ability to learn, fail, and evolve. So failure is no longer some indictment of your innate ability. It's just necessary data in the learning process.
Precisely. If you embrace the growth mindset, you stop asking yourself, am I smart enough for this? And you start asking, what can I learn from this failure?
That's a huge shift.
The payoff is immense. The sources define the key to reaching your full potential as seeing challenges as opportunities rather than as insurmountable obstacles. It means you approach a complex problem, whether that's learning a new technical skill or grappling with a deeply divisive social issue, as a puzzle, waiting to be solved through effort and learning, not as a wall that's just blocking your path. It's adaptability turned inward.
Wow. We have completed a really deep and comprehensive journey through the sources today.
We really covered some ground.
We started by wrestling with these immense cultural pressures from algorithms and the huge ethical dilemmas of medical tech access. Then we moved to the foundations of resilience redesigning education for adaptability and defining environmental action as a literal survival strategy.
All underpinned by that circular economy model.
Right. And finally, we synthesized that internal toolkit, the social glue of compassion that allows diverse communities to thrive.
And the intellectual and emotional defenses we all need for individual sovereignty, critical thinking, creativity, and that unwavering belief in the growth mindset.
This whole journey, it just highlights that the massive external challenges we face, the need for systemic change in healthcare, the urgency of environmental sustainability, they are inextricably linked to our internal capacities, our capacity for critical thinking, for innovation, and for ethical action.
Yeah.
So applying this knowledge means you are engaging with the world thoroughly and critically. You're moving from being a passive consumer to an active participant.
And you should keep this connection top of mind as you move forward. We discuss the urgent need for a shift toward a circular economy and for systemic pressure on corporations, recognizing that debt we owe to the future.
We also defined creativity as a tool for innovation and the growth mindset as the ability to see challenges as opportunities. So
Here's the final thought.
if we accept that technological advancement must prioritize equity, like we saw in the medical context, what specific role must our personal creativity and our growth mindset play in inventing sustainable, systemic solutions that are universally affordable, rather than just focusing on those small, incremental, individual lifestyle changes?
That is your starting point for tomorrow. Keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep evolving.
We'll see you for the next deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to get into something that is maybe the most rewarding part of language learning.
And also the most frustrating.
Exactly. We're talking about that transition from being really advanced, that solid C1 level, to achieving a true near-native mastery. We're talking about the fabled C2.
Right. And if you're listening, you are probably already there, or at least very close. You're already highly skilled.
You've been with us through some really complex deep dives, right? We've talked about AI ethics, the future of work, all of it. So you can handle the content.
You got the substance down.
But now we're turning the microscope around. We're looking at the learning process itself. We want to talk about those final crucial steps.
The refinements.
Our main source for this is a collection of excerpts titled Advanced Language Acquisition, Grit and Critical Engagement. And it's really designed for someone at exactly this stage.
It's for the learner who feels like they've hit a wall, a plateau, but is absolutely determined to push through it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is pretty clear. what does it actually take to get across that finish line to C2? What does it demand in terms of your mindset, your practice, and really a fundamental shift in skills?
And I think we need to say this right up front because it's the core idea from the source material, and it's a huge aha moment for so many people who feel stuck.
Go on.
Reaching the C2 level is absolutely 100% not about memorizing more obscure vocabulary lists.
So all that grinding that got you to B2 or C1?
Well, it stops being the main thing.
You're saying that whole methodology of just pure volume and retention, it doesn't really drive progress anymore.
It's not the only driver, let's put it that way. I mean, if you're at C1, you already have a massive vocabulary. You have a great command of grammar.
Right.
So the problem isn't usually that you don't know enough stuff. The problem is a lack of integration and critical application. The C2 level is a totally different ballgame. It's a profound conceptual shift.
A conceptual shift. What does that actually look like?
The source material basically reframes the entire goal. It says the next step isn't about learning more. It's about developing your capacity to listen attentively and think critically.
So you're moving from being just a really good decoder,
someone who understands every single word, yes,
to becoming a true, sophisticated communicator, a critical analyst.
Exactly. The mastery we're talking about isn't just linguistic in a narrow sense. It's cognitive. It's cultural.
Wow, okay. That changes everything, doesn't it? It's the difference between hearing what someone says and understanding the strategy behind what they said.
It's competence versus command.
Moving past just being good and into a space of real authority in the language.
And that's our goal for this deep dive. We want to help you understand the mindset you'll need to really embrace the nonlinear reality of this whole stage, and to give you the tools to finally get past that advanced plateau.
So let's just set aside test scores for a minute. Let's really dig into what the source material says is the true functional measure of C2 proficiency. It sounds like it's about quality, not quantity.
It is. It's all about developing that capacity to listen with deep attention and to think critically in the moment.
I used an analogy earlier, and I think it really fits here. You're no longer just reading the notes on the page.
Wow.
You're conducting the whole orchestra.
That's a perfect way to put it. Think about it. A B2 speaker can listen to a complex political speech, and they get the words. They can follow in the basic tune.
They know the tempo, the key signature. It's all identifiable.
But the C2 learner is inside the composer's head. They're anticipating the chord changes. They understand why the composer chose that specific modulation right at that moment.
And they get how that whole emotional arc is designed to make the audience feel something. It's not just hearing. It's a form of control.
Total control, foresight, real-time processing. And that brings us to maybe the most critical distinction in the source material. It's the transition from passive understanding to active critical engagement.
Okay, let's make that concrete. What's the practical difference between those two states when you're, reading a really high-level article about the ethics of AI in the workplace?
Great example. So passive understanding means you read that complex article and you can summarize it. You can say, okay, the author argues that AI needs more regulation. You've decoded the text. You get an A on the book report.
Right.
But active critical engagement, that demands so much more. It means you're synthesizing the information as you read. You're dissecting the author's hidden assumptions.
You're asking questions like, wait, is this author coming from an American perspective on regulation or a European one? Because that changes everything.
Exactly. And you're evaluating their rhetorical tricks. And then this is the key, you're formulating your own compelling critique or a counter-argument in real time, all in the target language.
So the C2 jump isn't just about remembering what you read. It's about processing it and then immediately creating something new and sophisticated that engages with the original idea on a deep structural level.
It's synthesis, it's criticism, it's creation, all happening at once. It goes so far beyond just literal translation in your head.
And to do that, to create that sophisticated output, you first have to have this incredibly nuanced grasp of the input.
Which is why the source material breaks down this super advanced comprehension into 3 essential skills.
Okay, let's spend some real time on these 3, because I feel like this is exactly where people get stuck. This is the plateau. The first one is interpreting intent.
Interpreting intent. This is all about understanding a speaker's purpose, even when that purpose is deliberately hidden or layered in diplomatic language.
So a B2 learner understands what was said.
But the C2 learner understands why it was said. And even more importantly, they understand what the speaker chose to leave out.
Can you give us a really clear example, a situation where missing the intent just completely derails a conversation?
Well, absolutely. Let's say you're in a high-stakes business negotiation. Trade policy, something formal. The person on the other side of the table says something incredibly convoluted using the passive voice. Something like, it has been determined that the implementation of Article 4 may be subject to review.
Okay, so a B2 learner hears the formal words. They hear Article 4 and review. They get the topic.
They get the topic. But the C2 learner hears that passive construction, it has been determined, instead of we have decided, and they immediately recognize it for what it is.
It's a strategic move.
It's a deliberate attempt to deflect responsibility, to hide who actually made the decision, and to soften the blow of what's probably bad news.
It's political doublespeak, and if you miss that, if you don't catch that subtle aggression or that deflection, you've completely missed the political maneuver that just happened right in front of you.
Precisely. Or think about a more personal topic, like the dynamics of friendship, which is another area we've covered. If someone is describing a supposedly close friend, but they're using really formal, detached language,
a C2 learner picks up on that disconnect immediately.
they catch that subtle discomfort. They understand the subtext, which is probably, I don't really want to get into this.
Yeah.
That level of emotional and strategic analysis is pure C2.
Okay, the second element is just as important, and it happens even faster. Interpreting tone.
Tone is everything. It can amplify meaning, or it can completely reverse it. It's how you know the difference between a real question and an accusation, or between genuine praise and, biting sarcasm.
And the C2 learner has to catch this stuff instantly.
Instantly, based on maybe just a tiny shift in vocal inflection or one single carefully chosen word.
I'm thinking about a debate on the future of work. The presenter finishes their big proposal and says, this strategy is, I assure you, going to deliver unprecedented quarterly growth.
Okay.
But they say it with a slight hesitation, or their voice drops at the end, or there's an almost invisible eye roll.
The tone completely flips the meaning.
It goes from being an assurance to an expression of deep personal doubt. He's basically telling you he doesn't believe his own pitch.
And if you miss that tone, you might stand up and clap for a proposal that the speaker was secretly mocking.
Which is a huge professional mistake.
It's a misstep a native speaker would just never make. And it shows why mastering tone is so critical for actually integrating into those kinds of environments. Your whole response depends on it.
This is also about register, isn't it? Knowing when to be academic versus conversational. Or spotting that kind of fake casual tone some leaders use to try and seem relatable.
Absolutely. The C2 learner doesn't just hear a change in tone. They understand the strategy behind the change in register. They see it's a deliberate choice, maybe to build rapport or, to subtly signal that they're the smartest person in the room.
The tone for a philosophical debate on art is going to be wildly different from one analyzing data on globalization, even if the grammar is equally complex.
Right. And that brings us to the third piece, which is often the hardest: interpreting cultural context.
This is the one that really requires deep immersion, doesn't it? Because it's about the collective memory of a language group.
It's knowledge that goes way beyond a dictionary. You have to understand historical references, quotes from famous literature, cultural proverbs, all the societal norms that are just baked into the language. They become shorthand for really complex ideas.
So if we're in that discussion on globalization, a native speaker might just drop a name of a historical figure or a specific event.
And that single reference point can summarize their entire feeling about, say, trade protectionism. Let's say a speaker is arguing for economic caution, and they make an allusion to a national myth about a time the country got too arrogant and failed. For the C2 speaker, that one reference isn't just a story. It's a whole multi-generational cautionary tale. It sums up an entire political philosophy in, 3 words.
But if you miss that context, you miss the entire emotional and intellectual weight of their argument.
Exactly. The non-native speaker might hear, we should avoid acting like that character from the 19th century novel, and just think, oh, a literary reference, how quaint.
Whereas the C2 speaker hears that and instantly gets all the baggage that comes with it. The character's downfall, how society judged them, and the implicit warning that's being made right now.
So the C2 level really transforms language from just a tool for exchanging data into this fully immersive vehicle for cultural and cognitive understanding.
And you're doing all of this at once, processing the words, analyzing the intent, measuring the tone, referencing the cultural library in your head.
All in real time. Because active engagement means you have to be ready to respond instantly and with an equally sophisticated comeback.
That cognitive load is just immense, which I guess is exactly why this path to C2 feels so frustratingly nonlinear.
And that's a perfect setup for the next part, which is the emotional reality of this whole journey. The source material is really honest about this. It says, achieving C2 mastery. It can be a daunting endeavor.
It is. It's genuinely hard. And it's discouraging because the amount of effort you put in doesn't always seem to match the results you see.
Which is why the text starts with this piece of advice: do not lose heart. That's so crucial, because if you're already at a high level, the gains you're chasing are so much smaller, it's much more subtle. You're not getting that big dopamine hit you got when you learned your first 1,000 words.
Right. That initial learning curve where every day you felt smarter, that's long gone.
It is.
It's less like climbing a steep hill now and more like, I don't know, crossing a vast foggy desert. You know you're walking forward, but the horizon just never seems to get any closer.
That's a great metaphor. And it captures the reality that language learning at this C2 stage is a fundamentally nonlinear process. We are psychologically wired to want linearity, right?
Of course. If I study for 10 hours, I want to see a 10-hour improvement.
But at this level, that whole equation just falls apart. You might put in 100 hours of really intense work reading, dense philosophy, watching challenging films, and then you have a conversation and you feel like you haven't improved one bit.
And what's fascinating here is that relationship between what you can see, your visible progress, and what's happening underneath, the neurological progress. They get completely disconnected.
Totally decoupled. And we need to understand why that happens. We're used to learning things in discrete chunks. At B1, you learn a new verb tense. You can see the progress. But at C2, you're not just learning a new rule. You're integrating every rule you've ever learned into this complex, spontaneous system. And that integration work is slow and completely invisible.
Which is what the source material calls the plateau paradox.
Yes, and the observation is so important. You will feel you aren't making progress, but that is often where the deepest consolidation is happening.
I think this might be the single most important idea for an advanced learner to really internalize. Because that feeling of being stuck is the biggest reason people give up.
It is the biggest psychological barrier, for sure.
So let's really break this down. What is the brain actually doing during these periods of frustration? What is it consolidating?
Think about a complex physical skill, like learning a golf swing or playing an instrument. At first, you learn all the separate parts: your grip, your stance, your arm position.
That's the visible learning.
Right. But to become a master, all those separate movements have to become one single, fluid, unconscious motion. And that process takes months of practice that feels really repetitive, where it doesn't look like you're getting much better, but underneath, the neurological efficiency is just going through the roof.
And the same thing is happening with language. At B2, you consciously knew the grammar rules. You'd think, okay, I need to form the passive conditional perfect tense now.
And that whole process of retrieving the rule, building the sentence, finding the words, it's a huge cognitive load. It slows you right down.
So the C2 plateau is my brain basically upgrading its operating system.
That's a fantastic way to think about it. It's moving all that complex grammar, the obscure conjunctions, the subtle differences between synonyms from your slow, conscious, rule-based memory system into the fast, automatic, implicit system.
So that when I'm reading a dense academic paper on globalization and I see a sentence with 4 dependent clauses, my brain doesn't have to parse it piece by piece anymore.
The goal is for it to absorb the whole structure instantly. Your brain is building chunks for complexity. It's making the application of all those rules automatic and, importantly, appropriate for the situation. And that internal rewiring is slow. It takes a ton of energy. You can't see it happen.
I can just picture someone listening to this and nodding along. They've spent 6 weeks listening to challenging economics podcasts, and then they go to have a conversation and they still fumble for a simple word.
And they think, what was the point of all that work?
Yeah.
But the point was the consolidation. You were increasing your brain's capacity to handle high-level input, even if your output didn't show it right away. That work on those complex economic structures was forcing your brain to reorganize its entire filing system. It's like that upgrade screen that says 0% for hours, but you know something huge is happening in the background.
So what, for you, the listener, is just incredibly clear. You have to reframe that plateau. It is not failure. It's essential integration time.
You're not failing. You're preparing for the next leap.
And this is why perseverance is so critical at this stage. You can't stop during the plateau.
If you stop, you halt the consolidation process. You have to keep pushing with high-level input through that feeling of stagnation to allow the internal architecture to fully integrate.
But how do you stay disciplined when you're not getting any of that immediate reward? When the effort feels so much greater than the game?
Well, that's where we have to pivot. We have to talk about mindset. You have to find a different kind of reward, an internal one, and pair it with this idea that the effort itself is a win.
It sounds like it requires a kind of faith in the process.
It does. It requires trusting the neurological process over your own emotional feedback. And that trust, when you sustain it for months, well, that's what the source material calls grit.
Which brings us perfectly to these foundational requirements from the source material. Grit and perseverance. They're the fuel you need for this nonlinear journey, especially when the rewards feel so far away.
Right. And grit at the C2 level isn't about pushing through when things are easy.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite. It's sustaining effort when the path is confusing and discouraging.
It's the ability to keep wrestling with a dense philosophical text, not because you have a test tomorrow, but just because you are so curious to understand it.
Or because you have this burning desire to express a complex idea with perfect precision. It's driven by an internal fire.
It's about showing up every day and trying the hard thing, even if yesterday you felt like you were totally defeated by one complicated sentence.
And that's the key word, defeated. This leads us right into the growth mindset principle from the text, which is that every stumble is actually a stepping stone.
I want to push back on that a little, though. The idea of a stumble for an advanced learner can be tricky. I mean, even native speakers get tangled up in their words sometimes, right?
That's a really good point. They do. But the difference is that for a native speaker, it's usually just a momentary slip. They correct it instantly and the flow continues. For the C2 learner, a stumble can bring the entire conversation to a grinding halt.
Because you have to switch back into that conscious rule-checking mode.
You're forced out of the flow. So the stumbles we're talking about here aren't simple mistakes. They are stumbles of high ambition.
Okay, let's detail what those ambitious stumbles actually are, based on the kind of material we're supposed to be mastering.
So the first big one is grappling with truly complex grammar. And I mean structures that are used pretty rarely, but they carry a huge amount of meaning.
Can you give us an example?
Okay, think about the subjunctive mood in, say, the Romance languages. Specifically, the very nuanced difference between the imperfect and pluperfect subjunctive when you're talking about things that are impossible or didn't happen.
Right, the counterfactuals.
Exactly. You might know the rule in theory, but when you're in a heated debate about the economy and you're trying to argue what would have happened if a certain policy had been implemented 5 years ago, if you mess up that specific verb mood, your whole brilliant point just evaporates.
The entire philosophical weight of your argument is lost because the grammar couldn't support the idea.
The stumble, that moment of fumbling, is the stepping stone. It tells you exactly which structural weakness your brain needs to work on integrating.
Okay, what's the second major stumble?
The second one is trying to articulate a sophisticated argument. This is less about a single grammar point and more about managing the total cognitive load.
This is where fluency really gets tested.
It's where it hits a wall. Because you're trying to do everything at once. Synthesize data, organize your thoughts, maintain the right tone, find the precise words, and manage sentence flow. All at native speed.
I can feel that. You're trying to critique, say, the current state of globalization. You have this perfectly clear, multi-point argument in your head in your native language.
A beautiful structured critique.
But when you try to say it out loud in the target language, you can't find the subtle vocabulary, the sentences come out all clunky, and your complex idea just sounds simple and weak.
That gap between your internal thought and your external production is the most frustrating thing for an advanced learner. You know you're a smart person with complex ideas, but the language feels like it's failing you.
And the natural reaction is to just retreat, to use simpler sentences that you know you can say perfectly.
And that is the absolute danger zone. Because if you always play it safe, you never leave your comfort zone. And that deep C2 integration never happens. Your brain is never forced to stretch.
So to fight that, the source offers this really powerful idea. It says that whether you're wrestling with that complex grammar or trying to make that big argument about global trade, the effort itself is the victory.
This is the absolute core of the growth mindset for a C2 learner. You have to learn to celebrate the attempt. The goal has to shift from, did I say that perfectly, to, did I push my linguistic system to its absolute limit today?
And in doing that, you identify the weak points. You give your brain the data it needs to get better.
You're giving crucial diagnostic information to your implicit language system. That feeling of failure or clumsiness is actually the input that drives that deep, invisible consolidation we were talking about before.
So grit isn't about never falling down.
It's about having the courage to stand up and try to make that complex, high-stakes argument again and again, even knowing you might stumble.
Success isn't perfection today. Success is the sustained effort that guarantees you'll be more automatic tomorrow. Okay, so let's ground all this theory by looking at the actual content. The source material keeps referring to these high-stakes, cognitively demanding topics that a C2 learner has to be able to discuss.
Right, because if we connect this to the bigger picture, the language isn't just for, ordering a coffee anymore. It's for doing serious intellectual work.
Which is why those 3 skills, interpreting intent, tone, and context, are so vital. They have to be ready to go when you're talking about subjects that are hard even in your native language. So let's use the examples from the source to really show what that high cognitive load looks like and how these C2 skills get tested. First up, the ethical intricacies of artificial intelligence.
Okay, AI ethics. This immediately requires super precise, abstract, and sometimes brand new vocabulary. You need words for things like algorithmic bias, accountability, machine agency.
Alignment problems.
Right. And because AI is such a new field, so much of the conversation is hypothetical. It relies heavily on complex conditional phrasing and nuanced modal verbs to talk about potential future risks.
You can't just use simple future tense. You have to be able to build these complex structures like, if we were to grant this level of autonomy, then we would have to ensure that mechanisms could be put in place.
Right.
It's a real workout for your entire grammar system.
And critically, you're juggling 2 different registers at once. You have the technical jargon, machine learning, neural networks, and at the same time, you need the philosophical register to talk about ethics and society.
You're blending super technical language with super abstract language, and you have to switch between them seamlessly.
The language has to be incredibly adaptable.
Okay, the second example is a total shift. The nuanced dynamics of human friendship. This uses a completely different set of linguistic muscles.
It absolutely does. This is all about commanding emotional registers and subtle psychological terms. You need vocabulary to describe things like relational ambiguity, attachment styles, ambivalence.
The delicate way trust can shift over time.
Yes, and being able to tell the difference between a disagreement, a dispute, an estrangement, and a rift. Each one of those words carries a totally different emotional weight.
And this is where interpreting tone and intent becomes absolutely critical.
Paramount. Because when you're talking about friendship, especially sensitive stuff like betrayal or deep connection, so much is left unsaid. It relies on shared history, inside jokes, cultural norms about how vulnerable you can be.
So a C2 learner has to be able to pick up on, say, the use of a simple nickname and understand it's not just casual. It's a deliberate signal of intimacy that changes the whole context of what's being said.
If you miss that shared cultural context, the whole conversation can feel cold or clinical or just plain weird.
Let's move to something more formal. The sources also mention the future of work.
Right. So discussing the future of work requires a whole glossary of jargon from economics, sociology, technology, automation, the gig economy, reskilling, productivity metrics.
But it's more than just knowing the buzzwords.
Much more. It's about being able to project hypothetical scenarios deep into the future. It's about using those terms with a critical eye.
Anyone can say disruption or paradigm shift.
But the C2 learner can use those terms to build a detailed analysis of a possible future and present it clearly, using sophisticated transition words that guide the listener through complex data and projections.
You have to be able to switch smoothly from describing current data to projecting likely outcomes to arguing for what we should do about it.
And the flow between those different grammatical structures has to be instant.
And finally, the source brings up the role of art. This moves us into the world of philosophy, aesthetics, and criticism. It's a real test of abstraction.
To talk about art in a meaningful way, you need a whole other vocabulary. Words for aesthetics, criticism, interpretation, patronage. You're almost always talking about abstract ideas like beauty, meaning, subjective experience.
And your vocabulary has to be able to support really complex metaphors and descriptions. You can't just look at an abstract painting and say, it looks weird.
No, you need the C2 capacity to explain why the artist's use of color and texture creates an ambivalent resonance or forces a reevaluation of societal norms.
You need to be able to use that kind of metaphorical language fluently.
And understand these deep, often circular arguments about what even constitutes value or meaning in the first place. It's a massive test of your brain's capacity for abstraction.
The main takeaway here is that this dual challenge is just relentless for the C2 learner. You are simultaneously managing the complexity of the topic AI, globalization, philosophy, and the full complexity of the language you need to discuss it perfectly.
It's a constant juggling act. And that's why just learning more words isn't the answer anymore. The vocabulary has to be so deeply integrated that it's instantly accessible and adaptable to all these different contexts. If it's not, your whole high-level argument just falls apart. You stumble.
Now, for all this talk about, intense internal work and personal grit, the C2 journey is not something you're meant to do alone.
No, not at all.
The sources really emphasize the role of the communal aspect. Language, after all, is the tool for connection. It's for collaboration and sharing ideas.
And the source material says it so clearly.
Yeah.
We thrive when we support one another, which really speaks to how isolating advanced self-study can feel.
Right.
At this level, engaging with other people, especially native speakers or other very advanced learners, it's not just practice anymore. It's an essential reality check. It's how you refine these skills.
It has to be, because those deep nuances of intent and tone and context we talked about in the first section, you can't really master those in a vacuum.
You can't. They're forged in real interaction.
In debate.
And getting feedback.
So we really want to encourage you, if you're listening, to embrace this. Go seek out feedback. Share what you're working on. Get into those complex conversations.
And this is why feedback is just invaluable at this stage. The sources even say that your feedback and perspective are essential, whether it's on these big topics or just on the learning process itself. So why is both giving and getting feedback so important for C2 consolidation?
Well, when you get feedback, you get that immediate external check on your interpretation. You might think you used a very respectful, formal phrase, but the feedback tells you it actually came across as cold and distant.
So the gap between your intention and their reception.
Exactly. And that gap is a priceless lesson in cultural context and register.
And what about the act of giving feedback? That's just as powerful.
I think so, because when you have to explain to someone else why a certain word choice feels wrong, or why moving an adverb changes the whole meaning of their sentence, you are forced to make your intuition conscious and explicit.
You're teaching your own brain the rules it's trying to automate.
It's consolidation through intellectual exchange. Think about that art discussion. If someone misuses a term and you have to explain why their adjective clashes with the whole concept of postmodernism, you are cementing your own command of that vocabulary.
It forces your implicit knowledge out into the open, which reinforces the pathways you need for it to become automatic later. It's a necessary loop. Learn inside, test outside.
So as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive into the learning process itself, let's go back to the 4 final directives the source material offers. Let's connect them to everything we've talked about today.
The first one is to stay curious. This is the engine. It's the antidote to feeling stuck on that plateau. At the C2 level, you're not just learning for the language anymore.
You're learning through the language.
Exactly. Your curiosity about AI or globalization or art, that's the intrinsic motivation that will pull you through the hard parts.
The second directive, remain critical of the information you consume. This is literally the definition of the C2 skill set we've been describing. It's active engagement.
Don't just absorb words. Dissect arguments. Question assumptions. Vigorously evaluate the intent and the tone of everything you read and hear. That critical filter is the hallmark of real mastery.
The third piece of advice is so important for surviving this nonlinear journey. Be kind to yourself.
Yes. Acknowledge how incredibly hard this is. Remember that plateaus aren't failures. They're integration periods.
So if you try to make that big argument about globalization and you stumble over the grammar, see it as useful data, not as a sign that you're not smart enough.
Self-compassion is what fuels perseverance.
And finally, the one prerequisite for everything else, for applying grit. Keep practicing. It sounds so simple.
But it's everything. Consistent, intentional, high-stakes practice, forcing yourself into those conversations where you might stumble. That is what ensures that all that deep, invisible work eventually turns into seamless, automatic engagement.
So this raises a final important question for you, the listener. How do you actually build these 4 directives into your daily habits?
It means making a conscious choice to seek out the most challenging material. It means proactively joining sophisticated debates. And it means treating every single interaction as a chance to find the exact edge of your current ability, because you know that's where the real growth happens.
Wow. What a detailed deep dive into the, Well, the often misunderstood psychology of advanced language acquisition. We started by redefining C2 mastery, not as just knowing more words, but as that critical leap from passive decoding to active, sophisticated engagement.
A level that is entirely defined by your ability to interpret intent, tone, and deep cultural context in the moment.
We talked about the vital importance of understanding that progress at this level is nonlinear, and that you have to learn to see those painful plateaus not as failures, but as essential time for deep neurological consolidation.
And we reinforce that you need grit, perseverance, and a lot of self-kindness to tackle these huge, complex topics like AI ethics and the future of work.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the learning process itself. It's a reminder that we are all navigating this complex learning curve together.
And we really encourage you to just reflect this week on where you feel those plateaus in your own learning, and to recognize the immense intellectual work you're already doing just by engaging with arguments on these kinds of subjects. That effort is valuable, even if you can't see the progress yet.
Now, to leave you with a final provocative thought, something that builds on this idea of critical thinking. The true ultimate test of C2 mastery might not be just articulating an existing argument perfectly,
Or even flawlessly summarizing a deep philosophical text.
It might be using the full power of the target language to generate a completely novel, complex, and unique perspective on a widely debated issue. An argument so well structured and nuanced that it actually forces a native speaker to pause, to genuinely rethink their own assumptions, and to respond with real intellectual curiosity.
The idea that your C2 mastery allows you to not just participate in the conversation, but to actually lead it, to challenge the whole framework. So our challenge to you this week is to try it. Try to craft a sophisticated, original, and deeply nuanced argument on a topic like AI ethics or globalization. Don't aim for perfection. Aim for the satisfaction of pushing the absolute limits of your new capacity.
Keep pushing those boundaries, keep asking those critical questions, and most importantly, keep practicing. We'll talk to you very soon.